Hi, I'm Laura.
I'm Molly, and we work at the Dartmouth Organic Farm.
Today we're going to be talking about biodiversity and why that's so important here on our farm. At the Dartmouth Organic Farm, we plant about 40 to 50 varieties of plants in any given year. You'll see about 20 or 30 different plants already started in our greenhouse. Biodiversity is really key to our success. Having a wide variety of plants helps us to create a diverse and resilient soil ecosystem. Each of these plants feeds from the soil in different ways, and it also provides different resources to our soil life. If you're thinking about your own diet, if you only ate M&Ms, you probably wouldn't be that healthy, right? But if you ate M&Ms and you also ate a kale salad and quinoa and a whole bunch of other things, you'd probably have a healthier overall diet and feel better as a person. So that's kind of same for our soil life as well. If we're just planting corn in our field year after year, the soil life is not getting the food that it needs to thrive and to create the resources for an abundant soil web. Having a diversity of plants in your growing field will benefit your plants in the long run as well as your soil. We think about disease prevention, pest control, and nutrient distribution across our field. One way that we manage for this is that we rotate our crops through each year. So we're never growing the same crop in the same place 2 years in a row. And this helps us in a number of ways. It will help us to spread out our nutrient load across our whole field over a number of years so that we won't deplete the soil totally of nitrogen or some other nutrient. For example, we grow squash, and those are heavy nitrogen feeders. But also in our rotation, we have beans and legumes, which are nitrogen fixing plants. So they will help to replenish nitrogen in our soil over the course of our rotation. Another benefit of crop rotation is that it really helps us manage our pest control. So different families of plants have different pests that prey on them and feed on them. And so the same pests that would plague our tomatoes are not the same pests that would eat our cabbages. By moving our crops every year and rotating them through, we're going to be, one step ahead of our pests, and we're going to be able to use that as a type of pest prevention. Also, because we have a diverse range of plants, the pest populations are going to be equally diverse. That's going to mean that they kind of keep each other in balance, and it'll prevent one type of pest from becoming a really big problem. Biodiversity also benefits farmers because it provides them with diverse income streams. If we had our whole farm planted in squash and we had a really bad squash year, like we got a lot of rain, it was really cold, or we had really terrible squash bugs that destroyed our plants, that would be really bad for me as a farmer because my whole income would be tied up in that one crop. But if we plant a lot of different crops that have different needs, different pests, and different growing conditions, we're kind of hedging our bets on creating more income streams and having something that's really successful in any given year. The Dartmouth Organic Farm is an educational farm, and we use this as a place for our students to have experiential learning opportunities around our food system. For us, biodiversity is actually really key in us achieving our educational mission because it creates a wide variety of learning opportunities around standard practices in organic agriculture, pest control, weed suppression, nutrient management, disease control, and other different cultivation methods that are commonly used in organic growing. It also creates opportunities for our students to try out new methods that might not otherwise be as commonly used and to see if they're effective at our farm.
We care about biodiversity on the whole scale of the farm, but we also think about it oftentimes on a more zoomed in level within a bed even. We might choose to plant two crops together that will benefit one another rather than planting them separately, and that's called intercropping or companion planting. So one example of intercropping that we do here at the O Farm is planting lettuces together with cucumbers in our greenhouse. A benefit of intercropping can be making the most use of your soil surface area that you have available. And for us, our greenhouse is what we consider our prime real estate because those are more controlled conditions. So we really want to make the best use, take advantage of that space as we can. The lettuces and the cucumbers are good companion plants because the lettuces will act as a sort of living ground cover that will suppress weed growth beneath the cucumbers. Also, the lettuces happen to be pretty shade tolerant, so they don't mind that the cucumbers are hanging over them and sort of blocking out some of the sunlight. Additionally, Cucumbers and lettuces don't have the same nutrient needs, and so they're not really competing with one another in that same shared space. Finally, once the cucumbers are bigger and well established, by that time we've harvested the lettuces and can remove them, and that will provide greater airflow beneath the cucumbers in that greenhouse environment, which can get kind of hot. Another example of intercropping here at the O Farm, we plant tomatoes out in our field, also on trellises, and below them we will plant clover as a living ground cover. The clover, similarly to the lettuces that we have in our greenhouse, will suppress and outcompete weeds, which is good for the tomatoes. It also, the clover helps keep moisture in that soil. The more roots we have in place in the ground feeds our soil life and microbiology, and the clover kind of has shallow roots, and the tomatoes have deeper roots, so they can access nutrients from different depths within the soil. Additionally, tomatoes are like pretty heavy nitrogen feeding plants. They require a lot of nitrogen, whereas the clover is actually a nitrogen fixing plant. So the clover is really beneficial in replenishing the nitrogen that is taken up by the tomatoes and creating a better balance in the soil for the crops that will follow the tomatoes next year. So far we've talked about planting different crops from different families together, but sometimes it's beneficial to plant crops of the same family in proximity. One example of this here at the O Farm is that we'll plant a mustard cover crop in a bed in proximity to our kale crop. And therefore, the pests that enjoy the kale, primarily flea beetles, actually like the mustards even more. It's like a special treat for them. So we'll plant mustards near our kale with the hopes and intentions that the flea beetles will flock to the mustards and not even notice the kale. We've used this method for years and it's proved to be very successful, and that's been great because our kale is one of our biggest selling crops. In addition to being a trap crop for those pests, the flea beetles, mustard is just kind of an all-star cover crop in general. It's flowering, so it provides habitat for our pollinators and additional forage for them throughout our field. And then it's also great ground cover, which holds the soil in place from erosion, feeds the soil life with the roots in the ground. When we mow it down, that organic green material will then build up our soil and provide lots of nitrogen-rich material for that soil life.
In our greenhouse, it's sometimes hard for us to tell apart members of the same family because their cotyledons, or seed leaves, look almost identical when they first sprout. For example, our cabbages, these are the seed leaves or cotyledons here. They're these little heart-shaped things. And our kale has cotyledons that look almost identical. Both of these are brassicas, but then as they develop true leaves, which look different than the cotyledons, it's really easy to tell them apart and they look really distinct.
Most of the crops that we grow here at the O Farm are what we call annual crops. That means they last one season. We'll plant the seed and then they won't survive through the winter, so every year we'll have to replant them. An example of that is a tomato. We have a pretty short growing season here as well, so we use our hoop house to extend that growing season in our greenhouse. But even so, when the frost comes in the fall, that plant will die. No more tomatoes. Replant them next year. Although the majority of our plants here are annuals, we do have some perennials on site as well. And those are plants that don't die over the winter, and so they'll come back to life in the spring, good as new. That includes our rhubarb, our apple trees, some black currants. Some plants that are annuals down in our field and would die over the winter actually can survive through the winter in other climates, including the protected environment of our greenhouse. This kale here kind of revitalized this spring, and we're really excited about it because it's delicious and we've been having salad every night.
If we think of our farm as its own little ecosystem, each of these plants that we're planting has its own role to play. And even the weeds that grow in our field or around our site are also providing key services for our soil food web and also the plants that are growing around them. It does take a little bit more effort to farm in this way because we have to create different management structures and timelines for each of these plants here. So it's a little bit less efficient, takes more time. But we feel that the benefits really outweigh the costs of the time and management it takes to farm in a biodiverse way. So for us, the name of the game is biodiversity.